Susan Leblevik 6613, who was responding to a video I made on Muslims in America, where I really was just reading some comments that I made on a Twitter feed. And Susan here says, "You are good and level-headed. What about jihadists?" So before we address the term jihadist, we first have to understand what the term jihad means. In Arabic, jihad simply means struggle. And in classical Islam, there is discussion of the big jihad and the small jihad. The big jihad is the inner struggle, what in Hebrew we would call milchemet hayetzer, the war of the inclination, that within ourselves we have the inner war. In Hebrew we say the Yetzer HaTov and the Yetzer Hara, the good inclination, the bad inclination. Kind of, you can think of it similar to, in the old cartoons, you'd see a devil on the shoulder and the angel on the shoulder, and they're arguing and disagreeing about which way our lives should go. And in Islam, that is called the big jihad, the big struggle. And then the small jihad is the external fight for justice, which has often been interpreted in the most extreme cases as the holy war. So we'll often hear people, and again, I'm a more right-wing person, I'm a Trump supporter. I would recommend everybody look at, from last year, President Trump's remarks at the White House iftar, because it shows, again, a more level-headed view of Muslims and Islam from an American conservative right-wing perspective. And at one point, I find it kind of humorous, because, the way that President Trump operates, he'll have a script and then he'll riff on the script and he'll make comments on the script. And at one point, he turns to Paula White, who is a pastor, who's his religious advisor, and he says, "I know you don't agree with me on this, but I'm sticking to this." And he expressed his love for the Islamic community in America. So there's quite often, just like they do against Jews, they'll find lectures, they'll find sermons, khutbahs, perhaps from a Friday khutbah, for Jumu'ah, for Muslims in different masjids, different mosques in America, and you'll find that particularly when you have certain people who are on the American right, Mark Levin has been playing these recently, saying, look at what they're preaching in these mosques. And some of the issues are more problematic than others that are presented, but also there's a lot of misunderstanding and misinterpretation. So you'll often hear Muslims explain that jihad is a legitimate Islamic concept and precept. And so, out of ignorance, assuming that the term jihad only means the holy war in the most extreme cases, so when you hear that, it sounds very scary. But if you understand what it really means, and perhaps, I'm not sure, on these recordings, they're only presenting a small little few seconds from the khutbah, that the outer struggle, which can be expressed, which is the lesser of the two jihads, the lesser struggle, which could be expressed either in political, grassroots, nonviolent action that goes toward seeking justice and so forth, or in the more extreme case, it can be an expression of war. Now, when we use the term jihadists, generally we are talking about the people who have the most extreme views. And not only extreme views, but extreme actions. And of course, as I said before in my original video, if someone is committing a crime in the name of whatever religion, I don't care if it's my religion or a different religion, under the civil laws that we live in this country, they have to be prosecuted. Just like we said with the cases of people who are beating people for Gittin, as we explained in the previous video, from my own communities. And so too, if someone is violating the law, they have to be, it has to be taken care of. That goes without saying. And if we are in an act of war with another country, we have to be aware of what motivates the people to that war. And that's also something that has to be understood in the art of war. But that's a separate issue. But currently, America is in conflict with Iran, who is run by a particular branch of Shia being a small minority of Muslims. And not all Shiites ascribe to the Twelver theology that certain parts of the revolutionary movement in Iran subscribe to. And that should be understood in context as well. But that's not a war against, as far as we're concerned, America. It's not against Muslims, it's not against Shia Muslims, not even against the Shia movement of the Twelverism, but rather, as I explained, the issue is, what are you doing? Meaning, if a country, for whatever reason, is threatening the United States, whether they're influenced by the Shia Islam as it is in Iran, or whether it's they're influenced by Marxism, or they're influenced by whatever type of movement, even if they're influenced by, let's say, something that, let's say, theoretically, there would be some sort of some of these like right-wing militia movements that believe that through violent means they'll restore a constitutional order that they believe is not currently being adhered to. Such under our Constitution, such a movement, because no matter what the ideology is, would have to be put down, just like we had with the Whiskey Rebellion, right? You know, we have precedent for this, of maintaining order, maintaining safety, maintaining the law, but also recognizing other threats that exist in the world for whatever reason. But of course, we know that a great deal of the threats that exist in the world are influenced by their interpretations of Islamic thought. And so it's a certain threat that exists against our country that we have to, and against the West in general, that we have to address. But the way to address it has to be, first and foremost, formulated in a way that's not discriminatory based on the religion. Meaning, if we are responding to a crime, it's not because they're Muslims or because they profess Islam. We're responding to the crime because they're committing a crime. For this reason, I'm against the concept of hate crime legislation. I recognize that it exists on the books as it exists today. I think it's problematic from a constitutional standpoint, but that's for the courts to decide. And as it is and as it stands, there are hate crime legislations on the books. But really, I think a hate crime is really a thought crime. A crime is a crime. It doesn't matter if you're influenced by a hatred against a particular religion, or you're motivated by a particular religion, or hatred against a particular racial group, a crime is a crime is a crime that has to be prosecuted as is. The issue of the hate crimes is that the motivation might be stronger based on this concept, and that's perhaps the justification for it, but still, ultimately, I don't find a justification really from my understanding, and I admit I'm not a constitutional scholar, but my understanding of hate crime legislation, I find it to be a very difficult thing to justify, and rather it should be better just to, understand the crime is a crime. If someone is committing violent crimes against other people, it shouldn't matter one thing or the other. The only thing is there is recognition of that there are certain targets, meaning that if there is a certain group, whatever it is, for whatever reason, that believes a certain thing, and they might be motivated to commit crimes based on that, that's the issue. I mean, I'll tell you, I work in corrections, and there's there's monitoring that is done of what is, you might call gangs, but it's not only gangs, but what we call security threat groups, right? And this is, I'm only going to hit the surface of this because it's a complicated issue, and it's also a sensitive issue that doesn't need to be shared. But generally, when someone is interviewed to see if they're a member of a certain group, whoever's interviewing them will explain to them, you're allowed to believe what you want. It's not a crime to have a different belief system. But we want to make sure that we avoid you being violent against someone that you might have a belief. Meaning, if you honestly tell me you don't want to be housed with someone from a particular group, that it's your right to believe like that, but it's my responsibility, being in charge of care, custody, control, and security, and so forth, to ensure that you don't hurt somebody else. And that's what it ultimately comes down to. So, and I'm only saying that because that would apply equally in the broader society. Obviously, the difference is that in a correctional setting, there's a little bit more control and custody, and so in care, custody, and control. But in the public setting, so too, I don't see there's any point in banning a particular ideology. And even to get into these issues of defining anti-Semitism and things like that we often see. That's not really the job of government. And ultimately, I think things like this become self-fulfilling prophecies and cause more problems than they do. Meaning the whole issue of the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, for example. It's a separate issue than what I want to address. But in a way, things like this cause more anti-Semitism, quote unquote. I don't like the term anti-Semitism, to be honest. Because people suspect, oh look, the Jews, they're out to ban free speech and free thought. I can't speak for the Jews. I'm just one Jew. I happen to be a rabbi. And not a very successful rabbi at that, just like my holy ancestor that I revere and have a tremendous amount of respect and devotion to, the Chavos Yair, Rabbi Bacharach, also was not very successful in the rabbinate. And so it's part of my heritage, I guess. But nonetheless, thankfully I do work in ministry, and I don't see any purpose or gain in the world by the government getting involved, and it's very bad optics at the very least to have these things like the IHRA and so forth. It doesn't serve any purpose. What does serve purpose is recognizing threats and trying to prevent those threats from happening, and which is similar to what we saw recently with the Reform Temple in Michigan, that there was someone who was motivated. I don't think it was really even so much by religious fervor, but by personal feelings, political fervor, and attempted to take revenge. But this particular institution had the wisdom to plan ahead and to protect themselves from it. Now, again, the optics come into issue, because a lot of people who are more the conspiratorial types of views would view particularly the fact that they had planned for such a thing and so forth as some sort of evidence of some sort of a conspiracy. I have very little to comment on that. I don't know, but and I'm not a person who scoffs at conspiracy theories generally. But to me, I think that seems a little bit far-fetched. I think it's practical to believe, to understand that this particular institution, being a rather large institution, was prepared for a possible event because of all of the issues in the world, and took the proper precautions and avoided a major event being much more a greater tragedy than it was, avoided that potential because of their hard work of avoiding that. And so too, yes, we all have to be vigilant and understand how to take care of things and how to manage things. But I don't think thought should be criminalized. I don't think belief should be criminalized. I don't think speech should be criminalized. But what must be consistently criminalized is action. And furthermore, there also must be vigilance and monitoring, particularly when things are very open, that someone is making a threat rather openly, to try to mitigate that threat and prevent bigger tragedies. So it's a big balance, but back to the original issue. So again, there's nothing that really can be done legally about certain beliefs or even certain types of speech until it gets to the point of actually being threats and violence and so forth. And so therefore we have to find the proper balance and understanding, and try to understand how to live in the proper way, and also similarly our own speech and our own voices should be up against such things, and making it clear that we reject terrorism, that we reject violence, and we recognize the dangers that exist in the world. But also, as I've mentioned in a comment also, I do believe that just as there is a responsibility on the Jewish community to be more vocal about what we really believe, and with recognition that there is diversity in the belief systems of the different Jews, I think the diversity represents also that all of these conspiracies and so forth just don't work. Meaning the point is, I remember Rabbi Lapin, he should be well, he explained quite beautifully that all of these theories about some big Jewish conspiracy are just so nonsensical because Jews disagree on so many things. The classical issue of if the Jew who's stranded on a desert island and he built two synagogues, one that he attends and one he would never step foot in, things like that. We are not a united people. We've always been a divided people. But there is a certain sanctity in our diversity. So, but so too, I think perhaps the Islamic communities would also benefit in explaining in a more clear way what they really believe, and also their opposition to extremism. Ultimately, though, the fact that there are so many people who have conspiracy theories will just say, well, they say it about us. They say Jews just lie all the time. They say Muslims that they call it a taqiyah, which is more, I think, is more of a Shia term. I think Sunnis have a different term. In Judaism, we don't have such a concept of lying. We have to tell the truth. But people believe what they believe. And there's very little we can do to change that, except for meeting face to face, because I think a lot of the issues that we have in the world in general are because of we caricaturize human beings as others and don't meet face to face and don't know each other. That every morning he would wish a good morning to his neighbor, and when it came the Holocaust, for the decision for him to live or die, he was faced with like whatever tribunal to decide if he's going to be killed right away or sent to a work camp. And it was his neighbor who he greeted every morning, and his neighbor said, "Oh, Herr Rabbiner, you don't belong here. You're going to live." And that's how he survived. You know, there's a story of Daryl Davis, who he should be well. He's an African-American musician who toured around the South, and one day he sat down at the bar, and he's having a drink after his set, and the fellow next to him buys him a drink, and he says, "You know something, I have to be honest with you, this is the first time I ever had a drink with a black man." He said, "Oh, why is that?" He said, "I'll be honest, I'm a part of the Klan." I hope no one takes that out of context, that I'm saying that this person said. And then, so then they eventually became friends, and Daryl Davis wasn't on some kind of crusade to convert Klansmen away from their racism, but it happened, and these men often would give him their hoods and so forth because they didn't need it anymore. They gave it up, and this was his trophy. We also have on the American right today and the Jewish right today, these are Hasidic from Bethany Mandel, and Bethany also, she wrote about this, about how she would start to have conversations with people from the Westboro Baptist Church, and without any agenda, without any plans of trying to convert them, but just by knowing each other and meeting each other and seeing each other where we are, Ba'asher Husham, where you are right now, we understand, and that's, I think, the biggest way that we can avoid the types of violence and dangers and things that we've seen in the world recently. It's going to take a lot of work, and it's not easy. But I think the more people who embrace these ideas, the lessons of the Koblentzer Rebbe, the lessons of Daryl Davis, lessons of Bethany Mandel, and I would recommend look up online Bethany Mandel's articles, her op-eds on this subject. That's how we're going to win. Because the we is the whole human race. We is the people of God, of all races, all religions. When we recognize that we're all made in the image of God. and we can agree to disagree on certain things. We can also find a lot of common ground that we did not expect. All right, thank you for watching. God bless. And that's how we defeat the jihadists. That's how we defeat the terrorists. That's how we defeat the communists. By sitting down, I've recently twice participated in the program One Small Step with NPR in the past few years. You can find it online. When we engage in these types of things, we find that we can grow and learn more about the world. Thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, subscribe, comment, and we'll see you later. All right, how do I